Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalat, wassalam ala rasulillah. My name is Jimmy E. Jones. I'm the Executive Vice President and a member of the faculty of the Islamic Seminary of America. These are sad days in the United States of America. We're caught in between the coronavirus and what's happening in the streets of the United States of America. We're going to talk about Black Lives Matter in three ways tonight. The why Black Lives Matter, the what, from my perspective, what it is, and third, what we can do as people who live in this country. This is a very, very tough time. We're at a watershed moment in the history of this country and indeed of the world. And I think Muslims in particular should be thinking about stepping up and making a difference where they can make a difference, whether it's individually or collectively. And so what you see on the screen is an attempt by us to deal with the current situation. We're launching the Center for Ethical and Effective Organizational Leadership. Inshallah, in October, we'll be launching something called the Post-Pandemic Professional and Organizational Leadership Workshops. And the purpose of that is the capacity build, because we know that there's a major hit that Muslim organizations and Muslim centers, as well as other non-Muslim entities, have taken during this time. And we're hoping to build capacity by focusing on things like mental health, the power of prejudice, crisis leadership from the Muslim tradition, and how you plan to move forward given the situation you're in. And so that's something that's a very much important part of what we are and what we're trying to do in relationship to the difficulty of the particular hour. So the topic is Black Lives Matter, a discussion based on the prophetic paradigm. And we start with Quran, and this is a verse directed to all humanity. Ya ayyuhan nas, O humanity, be conscious of your God and Lord who created you from a single person, created of like nature, his mate, and from the two of them scattered countless men and women throughout the earth. We'll come back to this. So as we said, this is Black Lives Matter with myself, Chaplain Usteda Ieasha Prime, and Chaplain Usted Robert Horne. We're going to talk about, try to cram a lot into the next hour, but inshallah it will be beneficial to people who are listening, who are watching. So the panelists, as I said before, is Chaplain Usted Robert Abdulaziz Horne. He's also, aside from being chaplain in corrections in Maryland, he also teaches courses online and in person at Islamic centers throughout Maryland. And he also is an officer in the Annapolis Police Department and a former officer in the Baltimore Police Department. He was on the streets during the Freddie Gray riots, and he might tell us something about that. The other guest is someone we've had on TISA Talks before, our sister Chaplain Usteda Ieasha Prime, who's a scholar in residence and chaplain at the Islamic Center of New York University. Of course, again, we're co-sponsored by the Association of Muslim Chaplains, the Muslim Endorsement Council, and Rabata. So what is this all about? Why Black Lives Matter? This is a picture, we've seen lots of images over the past week of people who've been killed because of police actions. But I don't know about you, but I've seldom, if ever, seen this image. I came across it during a talk that my friend Omar Suleiman was giving at one of the conventions. And this is a woman, unfortunately, I'd never heard of up until that point. I start with her rather than the names we hear so often to get people to understand the pain and the outrage that you're hearing from the African-American community. The list is so painfully and outrageously long. It goes back hundreds of years to include slavery, including lynching, including Jim Crow laws. And that is hard to fathom if you're a, quote, outsider to the African-American community, the amount of rage and pain that the last incident in particular brought to us, because it brings back feelings about all of that. please don't forget this woman and what she represents. Add her name to the list, as Omar Suleiman has been pushing. And we should speak all their names and her name as well. I bring her to you. Her name is Dr. Jamila Yasmin Arshad, because I think she represents what we're about to a large extent in this country, not only for African Americans, but for everybody. Dr. Arshad was a convert to Islam. He was a medical doctor. Neurology, I think, was his specialty. She was a humanitarian. This is the way people, her neighbors remembered her. She was an immigrant from Jamaica, which many people who live in this country, both within the African American and the broader community. And of course, she was a medical professional that at one evening, she saw a young boy 13 years ago who had been injured in an accident. And because of the humanitarian person she was, and the mother and wife that she was, she stopped to help him. By the end of the night, Dr. Jamila Yasmin Arshad was dead at the hands of Louisiana Police Department, Louisiana Police Department. Why was she dead? The way the police tell it is that she refused to identify herself as a medical professional, so they tried to get her away from trying to help this young boy. And why is she not alive today? Is because they say that she swung her arms at them. This is a 51-year-old African-American woman. And they swept her to the ground face forward, handcuffed her, put her in the back of a police cruiser. I don't believe this would have ever happened to a white woman or a white man. I just can't believe it. You know, I'm a person who seen this close up because my son Malik was killed by a police officer 23 years ago. Why are we so angry? Why are we so outraged? Because of situations like this. You do Dr. Yasmin Arshad, an immigrant. She did everything that could be expected of her as an immigrant. She came, she got educated, she was living the American dream, and she was helping people in neurology, and she ends up dead as a result of police action. This is why the anger, because this has been going on for a long time. The reason I chose a Black woman also is because there's another kind of violence that goes on in the healthcare system. If you are a Black woman and you go to the hospital for pregnancy, your Black baby is likely 42.4% of Black babies that Black women give birth to are going to die before their first birthday. If you're a Black woman who goes to a hospital, 11.4 out of 1,000, I'm sorry, the early numbers out of 1,000, Black women who go to the hospital, no matter what your social economic status, no matter what it is, 11.4 of them are like to die, out of 1,000 like to die. How does this compare to, quote, white babies? Well, Black babies is 42.8 who are likely to survive out of 1,000. For Black babies, for white babies, it's 4.9, a dramatic difference. For Black women, as I said before, the 11.4 of them out of 1,000 are likely to die from pregnancy or childbirth related incidents after they go to And for white women, the number is more like 13 per 1,000. This is a form of violence. And I'm going to move on. I'm not going to dwell on this. But if you want to understand the anger, the outrage in the African American community at what's going on, Dr. Jamila Yasmin Arshad, a medical professional who was trying to be a humanitarian, trying to help people. And up until this day, she hasn't gotten any justice. She's gone to court. Her family's gone to court up until this day. And I believe it was simply because she was a Black woman living in the United States of America. So quickly to my points, because I don't want to take up the entire time, but don't forget her and what she represents. All right, 3 things to know, remember, and do. This is how I introduce our webinars. I want to talk about 3 things to know, 3 things to remember, and 3 things to do when we deal with what's a racialized, gendered society in the United States of America. What are 3 things to know? We quoted Quran 4:1, O humanity. The Quran is directed to everybody. Reverence your guardian Lord who created you from one person, and from that one person created its mate, and from the 2 of them created countless men and women throughout the world. We all have a common ancestor. I know this is too obvious, but the Quran believes this, and of course, there's something called the African mitochondrial Eve as likely our common mother. Most Darwinists, like our friend Richard Dawkins, who's an atheist and very much anti-religious, in his book River Out of Eden, he talks about this, that there's this African woman, and there's a male too, is likely our common mother. So in one sense, every human being on the face of the earth is African, and look at the way we're treated. The second point, third point, I'm sorry, is that race is a biological fiction, but racism is real. There is no biological basis for what we call the Black and white race. And if you want to take a closer look at this, I suggest a book called The Whiteness of a Different Color by Jacobson, and the PBS excellent 3-part series on race, the power of an illusion. That's the first 3 things to know. 3 things to remember, that Maryam, this is the 19th chapter in the Quran, was a marginalized person from a marginalized group. What do I mean? Women have been marginalized like they're marginalized in the United States. Maybe not the same way, but certainly marginalized. And Jews, she was Jewish, were marginalized during this particular time. And so the reason I bring her up is that this is the plight of people. I mean, people didn't want to believe her because she was a woman and she was from a marginalized group. I offer you 3 names of African-American women as role models. One was Elizabeth Freeman, who was the first slave to petition for her freedom in Massachusetts and won in court. The second, many of you may know, is Katherine Johnson. She's one of the hidden figures. You may have seen the movie. She was a critical element of getting the United States into the space race. And Miriam Wright Elliman, lest we say that there are no people alive, she founded the Children's Defense Fund, where every day, each and every day that she has breath, she stands up for children, no matter what their racial, ethnic background. But as usual, it's children of color who get the short end of the stick. You want to find out more about this, there's a book called Hidden Figures by Margaret Chatterley. And of course, there's a movie version, which if I had my way, everybody in the United States would watch the movie version of Hidden Figures. It's about American history. It's about true grit. It's about women standing up. It's about Black families sticking together. It's about moving beyond oppression. I recommend this movie highly to you. The third point here, 3 things to remember, is that rides or riots, no matter who participates in them or precipitates them. In other words, no matter who's doing the rioting and no matter who precipitates it. I say this because I've heard a lot of academics like myself who are not in the thick of these situations saying that these are not riots at all, that these are revolutions. Obviously, they haven't lived through the riot in Baltimore, my home city, or the riot in New Haven, which was going on when I came here 50 years ago. Baltimore, 5 years later, still trying to recover. And riots take people's lives. The other thing you should understand about riots is that if you Google, which most of us do, race riots and violence in the United States, you'll find that most race riots in the United States from the beginning of the United States to now were by so-called white people, whoever the white people were at the time, because everybody wasn't white at the same time. The Irish weren't white when they came here. And you just Google it. You'll find against Black people, against Asian people, against Catholics, the riots and people. It's not people are talking about property insurance. People die in these riots, and people are dismissing them as if they are not as important as a central issue. Both issues are important. Black Lives Matter is important, but it's not okay to destroy property of some of the same people and destroy neighborhoods and cause a situation where people get killed. I know that's controversial, so I invite people to push back when we get the questions and answers. Then finally, 3 things to do. I mean, we call this TISA Talks M that you can use. First of all, we suggest that you take the Muslim Ark Pledge. I won't go through it now, but I think it's a good place to start. For Muslims, we have a saying, matters are but by intention, and this is the first hadith or report of something the Prophet Muhammad والسلام, said, did, or allowed. It's the number one, is that matter. Your intention is extremely important. And taking the Muslim Ark Pledge to do something about racism in wherever you are is very important. We might come back to this later on. Number 2, work to overhaul 3 so-called systems. Take your pick. The reason I suggest 3, they're huge, but they're killing us. The criminal justice system is killing us in the case of George Floyd, right? It's killing us through mass incarceration. The healthcare system is killing Black women and others. We spend more on healthcare than any developed nation, and we get poor results. And the people who get the poorest results are people of color and the elderly. And finally, the U.S. food delivery system. I recommend the book Fast Food Nation. There's a movie for that. Because one of the reasons why so many of us are dying in this pandemic is because of our diet and because of what kind of diet is pushed at us. I would recommend that we educate ourselves. I'm not saying everybody should do everything. No, tackle the part of the problem that you think is important. Because if we all work together to do that, inshallah, things will get better. And finally, BLM, be like Muhammad, alayhi salatu wasalam. That's another Black Lives Matters one, be like Muhammad. And I suggest that you take a look at the Medinian Society of the Time of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, by Al-Umari, where we look at the transformative nature of the prophetic paradigm. I've talked too long. Let's go to the prophetic paradigm. I argue that there is something called the prophetic paradigm, and this is actually from a lecture I did in the UK several years ago that has particular principles, and that we as Muslims, when we react to things like the coronavirus, when we react to things like the killings in the street of Black people, we should have the prophetic paradigm in the background. And I'm going to stop here because I want to leave some time for. So we end with the same verse we began with. O humanity, we created you from a single pair of a male and female. No, it's a different one. I'm sorry. It's 49:13. And we made you into nations and tribes that you may know each other, not that you may despise each other. This is a message to all humanity. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of God is who is the most righteous of you. And Allah has full knowledge and is well acquainted with all that you do. So we have a particular position that we take when we face these crises. Right? So I'll end with a little commercial. We're about to start a 5-day course in a couple of days on counseling cross-culture communications. I think there are about 5 seats left, and so it's not sold out. It's 50% off. And then in July, we're going to have a course called The Foundations of Effective Organizational Leadership. We just finished a fundraising drive where we raised $100K for the post-pandemic professional and organizational development workshops, which we hope to take around the country. And we're still trying to raise money to take it to as many places in the country as possible. Finally, just to give you an idea of what we do, in the fall, our courses will be Advanced Hadith Sciences, Advanced Science and Hadith Commentary taught by Dr. Ieasha, and Dr. Jonathan Brown. The fiqh of Mu'amalat, taught by Imam Rafi Arafin and Ubaidullah Evans. The Islam in America, taught by attorney Rula Alouche and Imam Hamza Abdul Malik. And then Principles of Fundraising, taught by Dr. Sharks Siddiqui, who's also a lawyer. So these are things about building, these courses about building capacity in the United States of America. So let's go to our guest. So our guest, as I said before, are Officer Robert Horne, Usteda Chaplain Ieasha Prime. And let's get right into it. My first question, from your various roles, both of you, carry out various roles in the Muslim American community. What does Black Lives Matter mean to you? Either one of you can start.
Go ahead, sis.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Jazakumullah khair, Dr. Jones, for inviting us to this panel and this important discussion. I'm so happy and honored that TISA is actually engaging in discussion and discourse such as this. So in having the discussion as it relates to Black Lives Matter, it's one of those things where it's so fundamental to my nature. It's saying, does my life matter? Do I matter? Did my mama, did my father, did my ancestors matter? But it goes beyond just, of course, personally, because as you just mentioned, Hawa being our mitochondrial Eve, our mother, is essential as that Black Lives Matter is essential to all of our lives mattering, that Black Lives Matter is essential to all of our existence. And I think that's something that, in going back to that first ayat that you quoted in Surah An-Nisa, Ya ayyuhan nas ittaqu rabbakum alladhi khalaqakum min nafsin wahida. O humanity, you who, need a reminder that you have a reverence and a fear for your Lord. And so from this very beginning, Allah Ta'ala has equated having taqwa, having a reverence for Allah, with the recognition that you are created from one essence, that you were created from one soul. So when we talk about Black Lives Matter, it is a disrespect to humanity, but more importantly, it is a disrespect to the Creator to not acknowledge that Black Lives Matter.
Thank you. Abdul Aziz.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Thank you, Dr. Jones, for inviting me to participate. It's some very critical times that we're in right now. And as you know, I spent 26 years with the Baltimore City Police Department, and I retired February the 1st, and I transitioned to the Annapolis Police Department. So I spent 26 great years there, really trying to change the dynamics of policing. That's one of the reasons why I joined the police department, is to work very close with the underserved community. But in being an officer, I have to serve the entire population. And so, alhamdulillah, it was a great career in Baltimore, serving the citizens. And Black Lives Matter, to me, means fighting against hatred, violence, systemic racism towards African-American people. It's really a cry out for social change. And so being an officer with BPD, with Baltimore City Police Department, allowed me to be able to work with the community and to address those social issues that really has never been addressed. And so now, working in Annapolis now, there's a lot of need for help there as well, working in those underserved communities. So for me, this is what Black Lives Matter mean. And we really hope to reach the African American community as a law enforcement community, and really build those strong relationships and really tear down those barriers, because there has been mistrust in the African American community with law enforcement.
With good reason.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so
as Malcolm said, history is best qualified to reward all research.
Yes. So both of you are teachers, Ustad and Ustad. Is the Quran relevant to these times? I mean, I know it's a softball, but a lot of people who call themselves Muslims don't really, when they confront something like coronavirus or something like the horror that we saw with George Floyd, they don't think Quran, they think reactive. So is the Quran relevant to the kinds of things that we're facing today? Either one of you wants to tackle that.
When I think about the concept of Black Lives Matter in the Quran and this intersection of it, majority of the Quran actually takes place in Africa. Mm-hmm. So if we were to look at the story of Musa, this takes place in Africa. If we look at the story of Ibrahim, this takes place in Africa. If we look at the story of Yusuf, Musa, there's so many of these things that take place inside the continent of Africa. And so to even try to extract this concept of Africa from the Quran is disingenuous, and it would be dishonest. And so I think that the way that Islam has lately been taught has been from a perspective that doesn't actually address some of the very internal issues that are kind of embedded in the bedrock of the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was preparing us for. Right? And so when we look at, is the Quran relevant to our current situation? I mean, 1,000%. Of course, we're always quoting the verses that I made you into tribes and nations, not so that you would, dislike one another or hate one another, but so that you would know one another. But it really is deeper than that. Because when we talk about our prejudice and in issues of racism, what we're really talking about is the disease of shaitan, the disease of feeling like that I have some kind of need to put myself on a pedestal above the others, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has called for my submission. Right? That there is like this refusal, not about even bowing down to Adam, right? It's about the refusal to obey Allah and to acknowledge his commandment as sound. And so there's a deep set of soul rebellion that results in arrogance and egotism that is connected to not seeing how the Quran calls us to acknowledge Black Lives Matter, the eradication of racism, the eradication of prejudice, of oppression. I mean, this is what the story of Musa is absolutely about. Right?
Which is the most common story in the Quran. It's the most common story. We have people who are not Muslims watching. The most common story in the Quran is not about Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, about Muslim confrontation with Pharaoh. Ustad Abdulaziz, your response to this question, is the Quran relevant to what we're facing today?
Yes, absolutely. It's definitely relevant. And actually, we find the origin of racism in the story of Adam and Satan, the devil, who was an enemy to the human being. He refused to prostrate to Adam out of greeting Adam, and Allah revealed in Surah Al-A'raf that Satan, he said, "Ana khayrun minhu." He said, "I'm better than him." "Khalaqtani min nar." He said, "You created me from fire." "Wa khalaqtahu min teen." And you created him from the soil. And so because of this, Satan was arrogant, and he is the master of racism. And Satan, he uses this against the human beings. He knows how to play with the human being. And so when we look at this verse in the Quran, we see that Satan, he is the master of racism, and he knows that arrogance is what will affect a person's heart. Arrogance is what will affect a person's heart because it's a disease. And it's a disease that can be undetected in some cases. And our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made mention of a piece of flesh that if it's protected, then the rest of the body, it will be protected. It will be a reflection of this piece of flesh. And he said that if this piece of flesh, if it's spoiled and corrupted, then the rest of the body, it will be spoiled and corrupted. And he said, let it be known that this piece of flesh, it is the heart. And so this disease of arrogance, of racism is diabolical. And when we say diabolical, it's the characteristics of the devil. It is the evil suggestions of the shaitan. And so it's relevant because we see the origin of this disease called racism.
Okay, two thoughts, Abdulaziz. One is that when we look at this situation, we look at the nature of racism being, connected to arrogance, and we can see this. All we have to do is look at white nationalists and the people. I mean, everybody comes from the same place if you stop and think. The second thing, and this is a good segue to my next question. Oftentimes people say, okay, I'll only follow the Quran. We have people out there who Quran only, because Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was 1,400 years ago, and what we're dealing with now is not relevant. And to people who are not Muslims, the two primary sources of our worldview, and the two primary sources of Islamic law are the Quran and the life example of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So since you opened it up, Ustad, talk some more about what the relevance of what he taught and what he did is to what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. Well, it's very important because we won't understand Islam or the Quran without the teaching of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because Allah revealed the Quran to the Prophet, and the Prophet was taught the revelation through the angel Jibreel, and then the Prophet in turn, he taught his companions. And his companions taught their students, and their students taught their students, so forth and so on until Islam reaches us. And so the Prophet, he said that I left you two things, that if you follow them, you will never go astray. He said, Kitabullah wa sunnati. He said, the book of Allah and my way. And so it's very relevant and important that one learns the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that he doesn't misinterpret or misunderstand the meanings of the Quran, because the Prophet, he said, akhwafu ma akhafu ala ummati rajulun yata'awwal Quran yad'uhu fi ghayri mawdi'ihi. He said, one of the greatest fears I have for my nation is that there will be those who they will read the Quran, but they will interpret it in a meaning that was not the intended meaning. And so Allah says in Quran, "Fas'alu ahdhikri in kuntum la ta'lamun." He said to ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. And so this is important.
Okay, I'm going to push back a little bit, Abdulaziz, and go to Chaplain Ieasha by saying this. I mean, what you said, I think, is spot on. And what you said is often what we hear on Jummah, the imams say. But I don't think it's apparent from what you said, the connection between what you said and what's happening in the street. I'll come back to you, but let's go to Chaplain Ieasha about this.
So in making sure that I answer your question properly, that we're talking about the relevance of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam in our particular time.
Yes.
And we only have to look at, two things: his relationship with an organization called Hifd Fudul, where the Prophet ﷺ, even before receiving revelation, and part of the reason why he would spend time meditating in the cave is he was seeking to, number one, gain a closeness and a nearness to the Creator by observing his signs, and number two, he was recognizing the corruption of the Meccan society, and he wanted to be a part of a solution that turn the Meccan society away from the corruption and the evil by and looking away for how can he benefit society. And so he joined not long before revelation, long before revelation occurred, he joined an organization called Health Fudul, which was an organization that was committed to helping those who were oppressed by slavery, by color discrimination, by tribal discrimination, and for those who were pretty much the underbelly of society because of Meccan greed. Right? And so when we look at how that compares to our particular society today, or even how white supremacy took root inside of the American fabric of America, that it was absolutely about the development and the solidification of capitalism. Right? How can we, if we come together and say, okay, now you white, you Irish people who weren't white before, now you're white, because we need to consolidate our numbers, right, against them in order for our material gain, right, in order for power and status and money. So that's one aspect of it. Then what we learn about the relevance of the Prophet ﷺ after Hifl Fudul, the second part is his relationship with Bilal, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And his relationship with many, but specifically I want to talk about, and I may mention another, I want to talk about his relationship with Bilal and as a concept. The first thing is that he did three things with Bilal that are so significant and relevant to our time today. The first thing is that the Prophet ﷺ, recognizing the problem that the Meccan society had with the people of Bilal, right? Their relationship to Africa and how they had only ever looked at those from Abyssinia and from Africa from a perspective of being in servitude to them, so being a lower class. He said, you know what? In order for us to obtain true spiritual liberation, as well as order for us to give us the victory that we're seeking, we're first going to migrate. The first migration that we're going to do, the first hijrah, is going to be to Abyssinia, where at first you have looked at these people as being in servitude to you. Now you're going to seek refuge in them, right? You're going to actually recognize their kings, their leadership, their civilization, and you're going to not only physically seek refuge in them, you're going to have to learn from their governance at a time where basically the Meccan civilization did not have the same type of civilization that the Abyssinian government did. For example, when they had, tribal warfare, it was like basically someone, there was a murder. So basically I'm coming out with my whole tribe, and their method of dealing was just basically a war-based kind of society.
We call it posses today in the street. I'm coming after
right.
Posse, right? Go ahead.
Exactly. Bring your posse, right? It was straight gang violence, literally. And so by going to Abyssinia, that was the first time they had seen this level of civilized systemic government, right? And so when he sent even his own people, members of Quraysh, there to Abyssinia, he said, you're going to seek refuge, you're going to acknowledge his kingship, you're going to acknowledge his leadership, you're going to acknowledge his intelligence, you're going to sit and learn from his system of governance. And then once you learn that and you get and you understand that, wow, these are not a people, right, that are always in a position that I have only seen them, that they are greater than I have been treating them or thinking about them. So through that migration, they absolutely had to change their mindset and their heart in order for them to be successful in developing their own society inside of Medina. All right, so that's the first. And so it wasn't just Bilal singular, it was recognizing the entirety of what Bilal represented. So that's the first thing. Another small incident happens. Bilal, the famous narration where Bilal steps on the foot of Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, and, he says, oh, you son of a black woman. And, Bilal, basically gets upset with him, not because he's embarrassed about being the son of a black woman, but because of what is intended by that. he goes to the Prophet, tells him what Abu Dhar al-Ghifari says. The Prophet tells him, reprimands him and tells him you still have some jahiliyyah in your heart. What's significant about this is that the Prophet, right, you have some ignorance, jahiliyyah in your heart. What's significant about this is he didn't say, oh, be patient, oh, Bilal, it's okay, you are a son of a black woman, you know, why are you embarrassed by what he's saying? He didn't patronize him. He actually recognized immediately what was the conversation about, and he reprimands Abu Dhar al-Ghifari and lets it be known, right? And so what he says is, you can go to the highest point of authority in our system and you're going to get justice, right? You're going to immediately get a response that recognizes the wrong that's been done, that's not going to try to cover it up. And so and then in the end, what does the Prophet ﷺ do for Bilal? He raises him up and lets his feet be the one that is on top of the Kaaba. So if you were looking down at him before, now you're going to look up to him. If you were ignoring his voice, his black voice before, now you're going to respond when he calls, and you're going to recognize that by his call, he's actually calling you back to your Lord, to one of the highest levels of remembrance. So when we begin to break down this prophetic paradigm for how that applies in our society, it's definitely that Black leadership is relevant. Black leadership should be listened to, whether it's in a governance form or whether it's in a religious form. That when these claims of injustice come to us, we have the responsibility to respond according to our privilege and our position in society.
And this is sounding too good to be true, simply because you know, so let's say the Quran says we're all one people. The Quran says we're nations and tribes. The model of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is to step two racism. I mean, I agree with you. So why isn't it that the Muslim community, both so-called immigrants and so-called indigenous, and I really hate those tropes, because we're such a mosaic. I mean, and we don't fit into two boxes. But why is it that American people who born here, this is better, people born here, and that includes not just African Americans and people who immigrate here, why aren't we in the forefront of leadership like Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was, both in Mecca and Medina? If you got all of this, you got the Quran, you got the life example of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. What are you doing, Muslims? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Ustad Robert, do you want to tackle that?
Go ahead, sis. I'll go after you. Mine is very brief.
Well, I mean, mine is brief as well. I think that as the Muslim world has endured colonialism, physically as well as mentally, that we have began to look to the West and its views as that which is more civilized than ourselves. We have begun to look at, I think it was Bartholomew who made the statement that when he came into India, he said, I did not find a thief nor a beggar, nor a prostitute when we came into India. And he said, therefore, in order to dominate these people, in order for basically to win them to our side, we have got to convince them that their education is antiquated, convince them that they are uncivilized, and more along the lines. And it ends with him saying, and only then, when they believe that their culture is backwards, that their education is antiquated, and that we are the best, only then will they become a truly dominated people. Yeah. And so what happens is that we have allowed literally those who colonize Muslim lands, whether it be physically or whether it be by, the propaganda of television and watching Dallas in Egypt, and that we begin to look at that and say, it's so shiny, it's so beautiful, it's so wealthy, it's so civilized, and begin to undermine our own Islamic identity and literally change it out for someone else's believing that they were more powerful, richer, better than us. And so we have begun to relegate. What happened throughout the Muslim world is we began to relegate religion only to the masjid or to the seminary, not looking at how does the Quran and the Sunnah act as it relates to the entirety of our society.
Yeah, one of my concerns about how we react as Muslims, no matter where we were born, is that rather than reacting with data and knowledge, with our nafs, that's outrageous, and therefore we should do X, Y, and Z. When my son was killed 23 years ago, I wanted to tear East Haven up. I mean, the police department, that's what I wanted to do. And I opposed the 30-day moratorium on speaking in public because that's what I wanted to do. And I didn't want to do that because my Islamic worldview wouldn't let me do that. The other thing I want to say, and I'm going to get to Ustad Abdulaziz, I want to say is that we don't read enough. We don't understand enough about what's going on. David Levering Lewis, who I believe is a Du Bois scholar, wrote a book that many people don't know, is How Islam Saved Europe. How Islam Saved Europe. I mean, this is a guy who wasn't a Islamic specialist, but he came across this stuff because the reality is that the Renaissance and all of this, it came, what we know about ancient Greece, we know through the Muslims. And for 500 years, Muslims pretty much ruled most of Christendom. So my point is we don't read enough. We can't just react with our feelings of the moment. And that the reality is that you can't seriously teach world history without talking about Islam, whether you believe in what we believe or not. The power of we have at least 5 civilizations over history they help us understand. Okay, enough Jones. Ustad Abdulaziz, why, you got this Quran, you got the Sunnah, you got Hadith and all this. Why aren't we in the forefront of dealing with things like police brutality, in the forefront of even dealing with things like there's an ethical component to our response to this pandemic where it just drives me crazy. There's an ethical component. And I don't hear us being upfront as standing up and saying, people's lives are important, are more important than money. All right, enough. Ustad Abdulaziz.
I think
let me just say this before you do it. I'm sorry, viewers, if you want to ask questions, because I don't see any here, we're in the last 15 or 20 minutes or so, please type them in and we'll try to respond. Go ahead, Ustad.
Yeah, I think it's really a lack of sense of urgency, strong leadership, giving directions, and education, like you mentioned. Education is really the key because we can't do anything without knowledge. So there has to be a sense of urgency to learn and then to implement what we learn, to practice what we learn, because Prophet Jesus, alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, Man alima wa amila bima alima yud'a adiman fi malakut as-sama. He said that the one who learns and he practices what he learns, that the angels who are in the heavens, that they praise him. And so learning and implementing, going out into the community. And when I first became Muslim, I was on the police department in 1998. And I started this journey to seek knowledge. And, of course, I traveled with you to Egypt and went to other countries and became a volunteer chaplain inside the Department of Public Safety for the state of Maryland. Well, I've been for the last 20 plus years as a volunteer. And as a result of that, we were able to build out an excellent reentry program to help returning citizens with the things that they would need to reenter back into the society. And so this program really helped us to really tear down the barriers between the police and the department. And it's an ongoing process. I mean, it's going to take a long time before we're really able to stabilize the community and really have those strong, trusting relationships. But it's going to take a team of us. It's going to take a team of Muslims to really come together to practice these things and to reach out to the community and to make a difference. And it's to me, based on what I've been seeing, it's just that lack of that sense of urgency and that strong leadership to really motivate the Muslims here in America to really get actively involved. It's really been a challenge.
So I'm going to go a little bit off script here and ask a question that I'm just thinking of now. What is the role of people who are not Muslims in all of this? Because one of the views of us is that we're seen, and not African American, right? Because there's the Black Lives Matter is the focus here. People are not Muslim, not African American in all of this. You know, I invited some folks from one of my alma maters, Yale Divinity School, to look in. And the dean of Yale Divinity School, he wrote a very powerful tribute and statement, a tribute to George Floyd, and the statement about what we need to do as a society about this situation. So we've talked about Muslims, we talk about Black people. Do you see a role for people who are not Muslims, who are not African Americans, in trying to turn this thing around?
You know, I think, I mean, I want to say this in terms of African American Muslim leadership. I think it's not so much that we aren't involved in, particularly in places of leadership. Like I think about, for example, definitely during the coronavirus and COVID-19, what the Black Muslim psychology, what they came up with in terms of I think it's called the Black Muslim by Camila Rashad, what she was doing with the Black Muslim COVID Coalition, is that there was, I mean, I think they put out something to close to more than 5 to 7 webinars where they were addressing things like the medical apartheid that was going on, the huge discrimination that they were facing, that you know, patients were facing, in addition to just looking at how African Americans were disproportionately affected by COVID-19. So that's, you know, Black Muslim wellness, thank you. So that was something that was one aspect. The other thing is that, you know, I think about Ramadan, where they were coming out and addressing it. I think we have seen for years that, you know, it's definitely Imam Talib, you know, out of MIB in New York, you know, that he has consistently addressed issues of white supremacy.
MIB is the Muslim, I thought I knew it right offhand. Imam Talib Rashid, you're talking about.
Yes, Imam Talib Rashid
of Islamic Brotherhood.
Islamic Brotherhood, that he has always been in terms on the front lines, especially of addressing matters of white supremacy and police brutality. And I just have to say, even, of course, we know Imam Zaid is another one who comes out and speaks about these particular issues. So I don't want to say that we don't have leaders who are, you know, who haven't been upfront. Like even when it's not only us, because this is something that's really important. Like even when it came in the matters of the First Nations, that he was standing on the line with them, you know, in South Dakota, when it was the issue of the pipeline. Absolutely. So I think, you know, when we look historically, African-American Muslims have been on the front line of addressing social justice, right? And addressing injustices in America. We definitely have been there. I think we have a PR problem. Yes, even though that we have been on the front lines, but like, as you know, Imam Abdulaziz himself just mentioned, he's been doing this work for over 25 years, but we're not the ones that they turn the camera, you know, and receive the microphone. They're not acknowledging, you know, a lot of the efforts. I mean, I can't think of the amount of, you know, imams who've been volunteer chaplains inside juvenile justice systems or inside of, you know, addressing criminal justice. No, we've been there. I just don't think, you know, I think we have a PR problem. I don't think they're, because of, you know, our love-hate, mostly our love-fear relationship with El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, sometimes they're a little bit shy to turn the you know, the microphone in our direction. But in terms of being leaders, in terms of servitude and service, 100% we've been there.
Chaplain Abdulaziz. And then we're going to go to a couple of questions from our audience and then wrap up, inshallah.
Okay. Yeah. So, that's absolutely correct. what I meant is that we need more participation, and especially here in Baltimore. You know, there's a great need for more of the leadership to come out, because we have some real serious issues, you know, and like you mentioned, the COVID-19, you know, a lot of people they aren't doing the social distancing. And even though, you know, they're doing these public awareness statements, and people are going out and they're really trying to educate, some people they just don't think that they can catch the coronavirus. So again, the education and, you know, having individuals pay attention to what's being brought to them so that they can stay safe and protect themselves and their families from this COVID-19. And yeah, I agree. You know, we've had African Americans who have been on the forefront for social justice, and they've been involved in fighting against brutality and injustices. But I think we really need to, like you say, that PR is so important to get the message out, to show what we are doing to affect positive change.
And it's actually many African American leaders who were some of the first in the interfaith movement in this country, going back 50 years.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you the questions together at the same time, and then what we're going to do is ask Usteda Prime to wrap up with any closing thoughts, and then Usted Abdulaziz to wrap up and give us a closing dua. So here are the two questions we have. One is about the concept of allyship. What do you think about it? I mean, is this language of allyship a real thing, or is it really tokenism? You know what I'm talking about, both of you, you know, having allies. So, and the other question is, could 2020 be our falling of the Berlin Wall? In other words, could the combination of the coronavirus and the police-involved shootings be that moment when we break through the barriers of white supremacy and make maybe the election have a new country? So those are the two questions. And so Chaplain Abdulaziz.
Yeah, allyship is very important. You got to build relationships with people. I mean, for the 26 years that I worked in the Baltimore City Police Department, it was relationship building that helped us to have those strong relationships. This is how you solve crime. This is how you build trust. This is how you establish strong relationships. And so we got to have partners in this. And one of the things that we did in our reentry program is that we built out relationships or partnerships with employers, with job training centers, with health clinicians, with universities, with housing and drug and alcohol treatment facilities. We built relationships with all of these different agencies to get them to help us in this effort, because we knew we couldn't arrest our way out of this problem. People need help. And so that partnership was just so vital to establishing that public trust between the police and the community. So you got to have allies, you got to have partners if we're going to, you know, change what's happening in our society.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely consistent with the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, that even when he was going to Ta'if, he was going seeking allyship, right? And then this is what he received from Abu Talib. He received allyship. This is even what Abyssinia, when he went to King Najashi, he was looking for allyship. He was, you know, and so 100%, we need allies. It is definitely from our Islamic tradition to have allyship. This is something that was directly related to the son of the Prophet ﷺ. I do, however, think that we have to be very strategic about these relationships, very intentional about relationships on both sides of the equation. The way that we seek and engage allyship, and the way allies are engaging themselves. Because one of the most important things that we need from allies, very similar to the abolitionist movement, is we need them to speak to their own people. We need them to speak to their own communities about their own prejudices and their own biases, and their own, because if not, that allyship can actually, and we're seeing that in a lot of the protests, right, that happened throughout this week. Many of them are, who aren't following Black leadership, who aren't seeking what is it that you would like us to do in this particular circumstance. Sometimes in trying to be an ally and take things into their own hands. This is how we begin to see, breaking curfew, passing beyond police lines. We begin to even see some of the rioting and even the looting, thinking I'm being an ally and I'm showing anger for you, when in fact, when this is all over, then they're looking back to the African Americans who were saying, because of you, because you started these protests, now the cities are burning and there's looting and there's rioting. When they began to look at the statistics of those who were doing it, majority of them were not African Americans, nor was that done at the helm of Black leadership, of African American leadership. So I think for those who are seeking to be allies, make sure that you're doing it intentionally, well thought out, and that you're listening. An ally must listen.
Absolutely. So in terms of wrapping up, is this our Berlin Wall, the falling of the Berlin Wall that will usher in a new age of anti-racism, the confluence of, we have major corporations now making statements. Is it or not?
What's that?
Abdulaziz.
So I think
is this a watershed? Is this a turnaround? Is this a turning point?
Yeah.
The history of white supremacy, the history of relationships in our community.
I think that you're going to see a change, especially with this particular incident. I was in a riot. I was in Freddie Gray. And what I'm seeing that's taking place all over the world today, it's not just in the US, but it's all over the world. I think this is going to change the dynamics of policing. I think now you're going to start to see a lot of criminal reform, criminal justice reform. I think you're going to see different practices now. I think you're going to see some change, and it's going to be gradual. There's going to be some people that's going to be resistant, but I think that in the times that we're living in now, you're going to start to see a lot of change and policies implemented, and I think you're going to see a lot of change, in my personal opinion.
So,
I have a slightly different view, and just slightly. Let me just say that I think there are two things that depend on this. I want to say that I found it very beautiful when I saw the NYPD take a knee. That was a very powerful moment to witness. It spoke a lot in terms of just Colin Kaepernick and his struggle. But I also think to that 2007 FBI report that came to President Barack Obama came to him right before he came into office, and that was as it relates to the amount of white nationalist and white supremacist organizations that had infiltrated the police force in more than over 20 states. I think that we still have a long way to go in terms of rooting out those white nationalists, those elements within the police department. I think we have, to be honest, I think even the African American community, as well as those who were allies to them, have a long way to go in our stamina and being scrupulous in our methodology for how we carry out our agenda. I think in order for Allah Ta'ala to give us victory, we have to be very clear about what is it that we want. And it really becomes a hardcore question for us that, yes, we do this, protest for a time. And sometimes we get temporary results, like alhamdulillah, we were able, by pushing, the charges were up, the other officers were arrested and they were charged. But I think we need to look beyond incidental situations. I think that a lot of times we're getting victory, we're settling for small victories, but we are far from winning this war. Especially it's going to, because it's not just a matter of policing. We know that within the criminal justice system in America, the way that it was designed and it's being carried out on every level, not just on from the police department, but from the Supreme Court's decision as it relates to the recent decisions that they passed down, to matters that bills that Congress have passed, what this recent administration has done in terms of some laws. We have a long way to go.
Long way. Okay, Chaplain Ieasha, closing thought. What do you want to leave our viewers with?
You know, I want to leave them with a sense of hope. And the hope, mostly, to be honest, is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that, subhanallah, when he gave our prophets, our messengers, victory, it was, and gave them liberation, it was also because his followers were ready to receive it. And part of that being ready to receive it is to say, I'm ready to divest myself of the attachments that I have to an oppressive system. That part that Allah says he never changes the condition of a people until he changed that which is within ourselves. And I'm actually happy that we're getting to the point of being tired. They say I'm sick and tired, and I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm actually hopeful about being sick and tired. I'm hopeful that being sick and tired will lead us to two things: that we will divest ourselves from our attachments to this system, that we are saying, I'm willing to take the Colin Kaepernick stance, and if it means, you know, some economic reparations for me, if it means some repercussions for me, I'm ready to take that stance for the long haul sacrifice. In addition to, I'm ready to establish something on a different paradigm. But I see people in small pockets doing that. And so that gives me a lot of hope. I want to tell our young people who feel moments of despair of what can I do, what should I do, know that there are gifts, talents, resources, skills that Allah has put in you individually. And it doesn't mean you have to be some great speaker or some great political leader. Sometimes it's the artist in you. That the anti-apartheid movement was really spread a lot by the art. The message of it was spread throughout hip hop music. And I say that to say that if you were an artist, if you were a poet, you spread that conscious lyrics that uplift people and that keep them focused on what we should be doing. If you are a nurse, you're someone on the front lines, please keep serving. If you are a teacher, please keep teaching, and make sure you teach to the hearts of the students, that because this is where the change is really going to occur. If you are a lawyer, please keep working at it. Whatever is in your capacity, within your realm of talent and resource, know that that is enough, and that Allah has given you exactly what you need in order to be successful.
Thank you, Chaplain Ieasha. Before I turn it over to Chaplain Abdulaziz to give his closing remarks and the closing dua, I want to say a few things. First, some people ask where the courses. The courses for the summer are all online, and we don't know what the fall is going to be. And ask about inviting some of us. Just email us at info@islamicseminary.us, and I'll put you in touch with the speakers here. If somebody in particular you want to reach out to, inshallah. And finally, don't forget her. Just don't forget her. Just don't make dua for her and her family, and for all the others, you know. Dr. Jamila Ashar, don't forget her. Don't leave her off the list. I mean, she represents so much of what this country and what we are about as Black people and what we're about as Americans. So don't forget her. Chaplain Abdulaziz.
So I just want to say, stay focused, and, be patient, because everything that we will face in life, it will not pass us by. Everything that occurs is by the will and destiny of God. And so this knowledge is what will help us to navigate through life challenges, because life is like an ocean. You'll have days that the seas will be rough, and you'll have days that the seas will be calm. And so this is how life is. And so we have to patiently persevere and seek as much knowledge as we can, because knowledge is the key to our success. And there's a wisdom in which Allah has created the human being. And Allah revealed in the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقَتُ الْجَنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. This verse means that I, Allah, have not created jinn or humankind except to order them to worship me. And this is the wisdom in which Allah has created the human being. And so we as human beings, we need to have knowledge as to how to live our life. And Allah revealed again in the Quran, يَرَفَعِ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ دَرَجَاتٍ. This means that Allah raises the ranks of those amongst you who believe and acquire the religious knowledge. And so our Prophet, he ordered us to seek the religious knowledge. He said, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيدَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ. He said, seeking the religious knowledge is an obligation upon every accountable Muslim, male or female. So we're obligated. And so we have to fulfill this obligation in order to worship the Creator properly. And with this knowledge, we'll know how to live. We'll know how to treat people. We'll know how to interact with the society. We'll follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We'll follow in his footsteps. And so I just want to encourage the audience to use the faculties that God has given us. God has given us uncountable endowments without being obligated to do so. But God does out of his mercy and his generosity. And so we are at the mercy of the Creator. And so we have to live our life in a good way. We have to live our life in a good way. And so I encourage you to, continue to seek knowledge, to be patient with the trials and tribulations that we will face in life, and go out and make a difference. Help somebody to make their life better, no matter what your profession may be, whether you're a doctor, a police officer. These are good jobs to have because you are a public servant. And you have an opportunity to make a difference in someone's life. I enjoy my job. It's one of the best jobs you could have because you have access to the people and you can make a difference in someone's life. And so knowledge is important because, as I mentioned earlier, I talked about the disease of ignorance. And the disease of ignorance is real. And in closing, there was a great scholar. His name was Khalil, the son of Ahmed. And he described 4 types of men. He said the first man, رَجُلٌ يَدْرِي وَيَدْرِي أَنَّهُ يَدْرِي فَذَلِكَ عَالِمٌ فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. He said the first man is the one who he knows. And he knows that he knows. For this man, he is a scholar. So go and learn from him. The second type of man, he said, رَجُلٌ يَدْرِي وَلَا يَدْرِي أَنَّهُ يَدْرِي فَذَلِكَ نَائِمٌ فَأَيْقِظُوهُ. And the second type of man is the one who he knows, but he doesn't know that he knows, for this man is asleep. So wake him up. Wake him so he can help the people. And the third type of man, رَجُلٌ لَا يَدْرِي وَيَدْرِي أَنَّهُ لَا يَدْرِي فَذَلِكَ مُسْتَرْشِدٌ فَأَرْشِدُوهُ. And the third type of man is the one who he doesn't know. And he knows that he doesn't know, for this man is teachable. So teach him. And the fourth type of man, رَجُلٌ لَا يَدْرِي وَلَا يَدْرِي أَنَّهُ لَا يَدْرِي فَذَلِكَ جَاهِلٌ فَأَرْفِدُوهُ. And the fourth type of man is the one who he doesn't know. And he doesn't know that he does not know, for this man is ignorant. So stay away from him. This is the arrogant one. This is the arrogant one. So the first one, this is the leadership. This is the leadership that we have to go and follow. So I leave you with that. And I hope that I was able to say something to you today that you got some benefit from.
In closing dua, please, Chaplain.
Allahumma atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana wa qina adhab an-nar. Allahumma nas'aluka ilman nafi'an wa rizqan tayyiban wa amalan mutaqabbalan. اللهم نعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع ومن قلب لا يخشع ومن نفس لا تشبع ومن دعوة لا يستجاب لها. اللهم نسألك الجنة ونعوذ بك من النار. بارك الله فيكم. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us good in this life and in the hereafter. May Allah rectify our affairs. May Allah protect our families. May Allah give us the good ending. Ameen.
Barakallah feek. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
Wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allah barakatuh.